Hey, welcome back to Matt's Garage DIY. Today we're going to take a look at the Squires Bingham M16. So Squires Bingham later became Armscor. They renamed this the M1600. Both this model, which was the M16R because of the collapsible stock, as well as the M1600 by Armscor, also designated with an R for the versions that came with the collapsible stock. Great little gun, 22 caliber, fun for plinking, shooting any kind of small game. Surprisingly accurate, and it's a cool tribute to the classic M16. Obviously there's some differences between this and an actual M16. Different action inside, 22 caliber, handles smaller and further back on this model, and of course the collapsible stock, as well as a wood stock that these came with. But regardless, super cool. I think it's a nice tribute to one of the classic rifles out there. Anyways, enough talking, let's take this thing apart. So safety first, if any firearm you first start working on it, you want to make sure it's unloaded. Remove the magazine is empty. Have the action lock back. Then when we look in the chamber and visually, physically inspect it, there is no round in the chamber. You're safe to start working. First step is to remove the stock from the barrel and trigger assembly. To do that, there's one large slot screwdriver on the bottom. That is all that holds the two halves together. Next, remove the top half, basically 4 small Phillips screws holding this metal shield on. Remove the front sight and the flash hider, 2 small set screws in the bottom, take those out, slide off the end of the barrel. And then if we take a look at the front sight, you can see there's another set screw right there. That can be used to either raise or lower the height of your front sight, or if that pin gets broken or damaged, to replace it. Loosen the screw and the front peg slides up and down. To remove the handle from the top, 1 screw at the back that squeezes the dovetail, 1 screw in there. Remove those 2 screws, and then this top handle will slide forwards off of the barrel. Next, we're going to remove the bolt. To do that, first, take out this small screw at the back. And then start loosening this cap off the back. This is under spring tension, so be careful that it doesn't kind of pop out or hit you, but easy to turn, about 1 inch of thread. There you go. Sort of a 2-spring assembly that nests together. There's a little bit of a trick to the next part of this. Firing pin slides back and forth in the bolt. Firing pin needs to be slid back so that the charging handle comes out. Once the charging handle is removed, then the bolt will continue to slide out the rear of the barrel. So I've hammered the end of the barrel kind of on my palm and on the bench. Firing pin is slid back. Once this is apart, I'll show you kind of the exact spot that you need to get that into. But now that the firing pin is in the right position, the charging handle comes out. Bolt slides out the back. So taking a little closer look in the bolt where the charging handle goes, you'll see as I slide the firing pin back or forwards, right at the top, you can see that it starts to protrude into that opening. That's what locks the charging handle into place. So again, slide it forwards, slide it back. You can see that there is a very specific position that needs to be in. Now, if we look at the back of the bolt, you can see there's the firing pin. I just slide it out past. When the end of the firing pin is lined up with this shoulder, so exactly like that, that is the correct location for the charging handle to come out. So if you tap the end of your rifle, that'll help, the firing pin will sort of slide all the way back. It will go too far, and then you still won't be able to take the charging handle out. I just use a small screwdriver, kind of reach in, and then just push this forwards to that correct location so that it lines up with the shoulder, and then the charging handle comes out. So with the charging handle removed, bolt slid out of the back of the barrel, firing pin just drops out. Next is the extractor. I found I needed a small screwdriver, like a jeweler's screwdriver, one that you use to repair your glasses. Insert that right at the back of the extractor. There's a plunger and extractor that interact right here. Try to zoom that in for you. Here's the plunger. That's the end of the extractor. So you basically need to work a flat blade screwdriver in there. Once it's in, pull the plunger all the way back. So with the plunger pulled all the way back, you can now grab the extractor and rotate it out. Extractor's out. Then you have the spring and plunger. Mine is a little bit sticky. Probably have to do that a few more times. There we go. Plunger's almost all the way out now. There you go. The last part of the bolt is the charging handle. As you'll notice, it slides back and forth. Be careful. There is a ball and spring in here and nothing that kind of keeps it in place except for this handle being, or this cover being on the handle. I would recommend sticking this inside a plastic bag, kind of like that, and then taking it apart. There you go. Okay, there's the ball, the spring. Now, there's really no need to take this apart unless it's kind of malfunctioning or the spring is broken. Be careful when you reinstall the charging handle into the bolt during final assembly. It is very easy to push this collar and have that pop apart on you. Just keep that in mind. If all you're doing is cleaning or general maintenance, this is more than far enough apart. You can stop at this point, clean everything you need to, and then put it back together. But we're going to take this a little bit further. Next, we're going to take a look at the safety. This is a safety mechanism. In behind these two little dimples that you can see is a spring and ball. Again, be careful as you take this apart. Those will also go flying across your shop if you're not careful. Small star or slotted screwdriver, take that out. I would then cover this assembly as you slide the safety lever out the back. Again, starting to slide the safety lever back. It's now in the safe position. I can see the ball in behind there. As soon as it gets to this little groove or opening, the spring and ball are going to come flying out. So I'm just going to hold my hand over this as I slide that safety the rest of the way out. There we go. As you look inside, there's the ball, there's the spring. Just pull both of those out of the way. Spring, ball, safety lever slides off the back. Next, we're going to remove the trigger. There's one pin as a pivot. There's also inside a spring and another ball, or in this case, mine has a spring and plunger. Again, be careful as you take this apart, that will want to pop out. This pin seems to only go one way on my gun. I'm going to flip it over, push that pin out. Pin is out. I can feel there's some spring tension on that. Slowly let that off. So you can see right there, there's my spring and plunger. I'll now take that out. There's one more pin right here that will need to be driven out to remove the trigger. Part of the assembly is catching on that inside. So we'll next push that out. Again, flipping this over. The pin on mine appears to be one directional. This pin is a bit stiffer, and I did need to hammer that out. See that pin starting to come out the other side, right there. I don't have a punch that's quite small enough to go all the way through, so I very carefully grab this with a pair of pliers. And then I'll start kind of working that the rest of the way out. See, pin is coming out further. I really only need to move it out enough that the trigger comes out, so just a little bit more. No need to take that pin all the way out. There we go. Trigger assembly is now removed. So moving along, inside of this housing is the sear. and then the magazine release. If you're going to take those off, you can do this kind of with this body still attached to the barrel. I am going to take that off. There's one sort of large bolt at the front. I just grip that with a pair of vice grips to kind of break that free. Then I'm able to spin that out. And then on this end, looking deep inside that housing, you can see there's a slotted screw down there. You want to be very careful that you don't strip the head of that. Mine was quite tight. I ended up spraying it with penetrating oil a few times and letting it soak. I think if you strip that screw, you will probably never be able to get that out. So just be very careful. Take that out, and then the housing will come off. Let's start with the magazine catch. So a very tiny hole right there has one of these wire pins through that. I've actually filed down a finishing nail that will fit in there so I can drive that out. And then larger pin up here. So we'll start with the small one. See, that's coming out the back side. Again, with these fine wire pins, I'm just going to tap it part way and then just use a pair of pliers to kind of ease that out. There you go. You saw the latch just kind of popped. Pressure is now off of that spring. Now I'm going to drive out this pin. That will then allow the mag release to fall out. So tap that out. See, coming out the back side there. Needs to go just a little bit more. Oop, all the way out now. Okay, there's the mag release and the spring. Those two go together like that for reassembly. This is the sear. 2 large pins, 1 small wire pin right there. I'm going to drive out this pin first. That will help to relieve a little bit of the spring pressure. Then I will drive out the wire pin right there that's holding that spring in. Make sure that you kind of keep that covered as you drive that pin out. You don't want to lose that spring as it flies across your shop. Yep. Pins out, you can see that the sear snapped up. I'm going to start tapping out this fine wire pin. Okay, got it started. So I'm going to put my thumb over top of this to keep that spring from flying out, and then just continue to use these pliers. Work that pin out. Nice and slow. Don't want to bend it. There we go. I don't know if you heard that click. That was the spring clearing the end of it. So the spring is out. I'm going to leave these wire pins. You can see I've left this one as well. I'm going to leave those all in place. Last pin. That one right there, and then the sear is out. There you go. There's the sear. So we've got it all taken apart. Time to put it back together. So before I put this back together, I did want to kind of lay out all the pieces. I've just laid them on the side of the body, just so you can see how everything interacts. So you'll notice this is the sear spring. That will need to be compressed. And then this little hole is where the wire pin goes through. So that spring will be compressed between the underside of the sear and that pin. And then there is one wire pin that goes through the mag catch right there to sort of control the travel. All right, that's what it looks like inside. It's going to be tough to see some of that as it goes back together, but that'll give you a good idea of what's going on in there. Time to put this back together. We're going to start with the sear. So we're going to use that pin and this pin. The sear is going to rotate around this pin, and the rear pin is going to be a stop. So I'm going to start by putting the pivot pin in. Do that a little bit by feel to kind of get that in. There we go. So the pin is started into the end of the sear. You can see that right there. The pin is started in there. So I'll tap that in the rest of the way. Front sear pin is in. Next I'm going to put the sear spring in. So I'm not going to put that pin in yet, because by leaving that out, that gives me a little bit of extra room to compress this spring. I'm going to use a block so that the protrusion of the sear can sort of get in or fit into that. And I will drop the sear spring in here. There's a square notch cut out of the bottom of the sear that helps you to align the bottom of that. Next, I'm going to use kind of the corner of a screwdriver to compress that spring. You've got to kind of reach down inside the body to push that down and then start to push this wire pin through. Got it about halfway. You can see right there. Let's push that again with a screwdriver. Now kind of catching more of the edge of it. There, I've got the pin all the way across. Just give that a couple taps with a hammer and I'll set that pin. Time for the final sear pin, so I'm going to push down on the sear, compress that, drop this pin in. You can see now that's limiting the upward travel of the sear. Let's finish driving this pin in. Next is the magazine release. Rotates around the large pin, small wire pin in the bottom acts as a stopper or a movement guide. Spring is also put in place with the top spring like that. So tip this up so you can see in the bottom. So I'm going to start by feeding the magazine release in, getting that pin started. Need that to just go through the first. As you can see, that's where the groove where your spring is going to go. So I'm just going to push the pin far enough that it goes through this first leg. Again, a little bit of feel to kind of get that lined up. Just backing that pin out so that I have a gap in there for my spring. I'll flip it over this way. Put the spring in. Oops. Try to keep my fat fingers out of this video. So drop that spring in. Again, push the pin through so the pin has now gone through the spring into the other side of the lever. I'll just finish driving that through the rest of the body. So you can see I've got spring tension there, so now I'm just going to put a little bit of pressure on this so that the second hole in the release lever lines up with this wire pin. And I'll tap that wire pin through. Now I have some spring tension on my mag release. We'll just pop a mag in, test that out. Mag is seated, so you can either pull the lever. When it's assembled, you won't be able to do that, or on these mags, you can push the mag release there. You can see that that activates it. Magazine slides back out. Now, before you put the trigger back in, you actually need to reattach this to the barrel. You can see there's this small hole at the back. That is where this little spring and plunger work, but you need the barrel as a backstop for that so that there's something for the spring to push against. So we're going to now reattach that. My Phillips screw is still in the body at the back end. I haven't taken it all the way out. It's out far enough that the two come apart, but I've left that in there. I'm going to set this in. I'm actually going to put this bolt in first at the front, just because that'll be the easiest to sort of see and align. Okay. Snug, but not too tight. Now I'm going to tighten up the back one. Back's tight. Now we'll do the final tightening on the front. Again, just going to grip the outside of that with some vice grips. Might have to give that a couple turns. Nice and snug. Now for the trigger, feed that up through the bottom. Need to make sure as you look through the slot of the bolt, sure you can see that in there. Yeah, you can just see the kind of tipping lever on the end of the trigger right up through the bolt. So I've got the trigger in. I'll kind of fiddle around with the positioning of that. And then next I will drive in this wire pin just to keep the trigger from falling out. After that, the spring and plunger and the final pin. So if the trigger positioned correctly, you can see, if you look through the little gap right there, you can see the little hook on that interacting with the end of the sear. Wire pin is in place, prevents the trigger from dropping out the bottom. Right in here, you can see the little hole. That's where the spring and plunger drops in. There you go, just like that. If your model has a ball instead of a little plunger, you can just put a little dab of grease on there. That'll help hold that ball in place while you complete the assembly. So putting this final pin in can be a little bit of a trick. You need to be pushing sort of straight down to depress the ball and plunger. And then also looking through, you can see the light in that hole now. Then I will start to feed my pin through. All right, I'm trying to do this in a way that I can actually show you what I'm doing. So I've put a block under the pin on the back side, so all the weight of the pin is kind of pushing against that block. Looking through this hole, I've got everything lined up. Now I'm going to tap lightly on the front side. There you go. The pin has started to go in. Now I can flip it over, finish driving the pin the rest of the way. Before you finish putting that pin all the way in, you want to take a little look right in there. Just make sure that your spring is working correctly. It hasn't got folded over during that assembly process. At this point, I'm happy with the way that's working. I'm going to finish driving this pin in. Moving on to the bolt, we're just going to put the extractor back together. So first we've got the spring and plunger. Slides in. I take my extractor, start pushing that plunger in. Again, you sort of want to use a bit of a rotation as you get to final position. There you go. Check the action of it. Extractor is back in. Now we're going to reinstall the bolt. I'm going to drop the firing pin in on the top. Slide that in the end. As it hits the part of the trigger, you just have to give that slight pull on the trigger. Bolt slides the rest of the way in. Again, to get your handle in, you're going to want to make sure these are lined up right at the back here. You're sliding that bolt in to this point. Looks like everything is still good and lined up. I'm going to put the extractor hole handle in there now. So I've got my extractor handle. Again, a little groove or slot goes up. As I mentioned earlier, be careful as you push this in there. If that's not completely aligned and you push this outer portion kind of down the shaft, the little ball is going to go flying. You can always reach in the end with a screwdriver just to kind of fine tune the positioning of that firing pin. Here we go. Got that in. Just before you actually install the springs, just make sure that you've got good movement of the bolt forward and back. I found that it kind of hung up a little bit on the top part of the trigger. I had to fiddle with it a little bit. Now I've got that good action. Over the springs, you've got two springs that sort of nest inside of each other like that. I have found it can be a little bit finicky getting these two ends sort of in the right position in the end. We're going to start by feeding the smaller spring in. Then we'll put the larger one over top. You can see that just fits inside of the end of the bolt. Then we'll start to compress this. Now I'll be able to put this large cap on the end, compress those springs, and start screwing this together. It is under spring tension as you start to turn those threads. Just make sure you don't cross thread it while you're kind of forcing that all back together. Time for the safety. Slide this little safety lever into place. So you can see there's the hole for the screw. So we're going to back that up, exposing the hole for the spring and ball. Drop the spring in. Put the ball on. This can be a little tricky. You need to push that ball down and then slide the lever over top of it. I don't want to tell you how many times I've lost that ball trying to do this, but basically I'm going to put my finger down over top of the whole thing, push it in as far as I can. Nope, didn't quite go, so I'll just back that up. Put the ball back on top again. Push the spring and ball down. Actually, I'm going to try to do this with a screwdriver. There we go. Now I can slide the lever over. There you go. You can hear it clicking. I can put the little screw in that holds the safety in place as well. At this point, you can now put the little locking screw in on the bottom of your barrel. If you put that in first, you're not going to be able to slide your safety lever on. So I'll just tighten those two screws up and we'll move on to the next step. With both those screws in place, just double check the functionality of your safety. You can see in the safe position, prevents that trigger from being pulled. Slid the two rubber mounts on for the upper part of the handguard as well as the front sight. There is a little dimple that will help you to align the set screw. And then I've put the flash hider on the end of the barrel. The set screw for that is missing. I've got a 1032 bolt. Check the threads. So I'm just going to later on, but I will cut this up and make a little set screw for the flash hider. So I'm going to tighten this up and then we can put the stock on. Now to put the barrel and stock together, we've got these two rubber pieces on the top. There are specific grooves in the top of the stock that these line up with. Kind of drop that into place. Also making sure your trigger is through. Everything's looking good. Flip that over. We're going to put this large screw in the bottom and tighten that up. Okay. Last thing is the heat shield on top of the handguard. Put that on. We've got 4 little Phillips screws to put in there. Assembly's done. So there you have it. Squires Bingham Armscor M1600. Take it apart, put it back together. Hope you found this video helpful. If you did, be sure to click that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for my next video.